Renee Walker never imagined that $10 could measure exactly how much dignity costs. That rainy Tuesday evening in June, standing at the counter of Chemist Warehouse on Broadway in Newmarket, Auckland, with Noah burning with fever in her arms and the pharmacy assistant looking at her with that particular kind of disdain reserved for people who cannot afford their own desperation, she understood that sometimes the distance between survival and collapse is precisely N1047. Until a stranger's voice cut through the humiliation, and everything she thought she knew about kindness, pride, and what it means to be truly seen began to unravel in ways she never expected. Support the channel by leaving your like and comment, and let's go to our story. The morning had started wrong. Renee woke at 5:15 in the small 28-square-meter apartment in Otahuhu, the alarm piercing through the grey winter dawn that barely filtered through the single window overlooking the housing complex parking lot. Noah had been crying intermittently through the night, his small body radiating heat that no amount of damp cloths on his forehead could reduce. She pressed her lips to his temple the way pediatricians teach, that instinctive thermometer mothers develop, and felt the fever spiking higher than yesterday, higher than the night before. The pediatrician at the community health clinic had been clear on Monday afternoon. If the fever doesn't break by Tuesday, you need to start the antibiotics immediately, no delays. Renee calculated rapidly while preparing instant coffee in the small electric kettle, the numbers scrolling through her mind like an endless receipt. Rent paid on Friday. Electricity bill finally cleared on Saturday. Groceries stretched to last until Thursday, when Mrs. Chen paid her for the extra cleaning job at the restaurant, and $37.50 in her wallet. The prescription folded in her pocket. Antibiotics for a 9-month-old baby, ends $47.90. She swallowed the coffee without tasting it, the bitterness matching the knot forming in her stomach. $10 short, just $10. The veterinary clinic in Newmarket, where Renee worked 4 years as a cleaning assistant, operated with mechanical efficiency. She arrived at 7:30, changed into the blue uniform that smelled perpetually of disinfectant and wet dog, and began the routine that had become muscle memory: mopping consultation rooms, sanitizing stainless steel exam tables, wiping down kennels, scrubbing the small surgical suite. The veterinarians barely acknowledged her presence, which she preferred. Invisibility was easier than explaining why her eyes were red from lack of sleep, why she checked her phone obsessively during her 10-minute break, why she asked to leave 30 minutes early, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Her supervisor, a woman named Janet with permanently pursed lips, exhaled sharply. "Leaving early again, Renee? This is the 3rd time this month." Renee explained about Noah, about the fever, about the prescription. Janet's expression didn't soften. "We all have children. We all have responsibilities. If you can't manage your personal life without disrupting work, maybe you need to reconsider your priorities." Renee nodded, swallowing the response burning in her throat. She needed this job. Ends of $3,650 monthly. It wasn't much, but it was everything. At 6:30 p.m., Renee practically ran from the clinic, coat half on, bag catching on the door handle. The rain had started during the afternoon, that relentless Auckland winter rain that soaks through everything, turning streets into mirrors reflecting grey sky. She didn't have money for the bus. She walked, ran the 15 minutes to Chemist Warehouse, Noah bundled against her chest in the carrier, his small whimpers cutting through her like physical wounds. His fever made him a furnace against her body. Pedestrians hurried past, umbrellas bobbing, no one noticing the young woman moving with desperate purpose through the rain. Chemist Warehouse on Broadway was bright, fluorescent, sterile. Automatic doors opened with a cheerful chime that felt obscene against Renee's rising panic. She joined the queue at the prescription counter, 5 people ahead, Noah starting to cry properly now. That exhausted wail of a sick baby who has no comfort left. She rocked him automatically, murmuring nonsense, soothing sounds, feeling the eyes of other customers landing on her and sliding away. The queue moved slowly. a woman collecting blood pressure medication, a man asking detailed questions about antihistamines, an elderly couple confused about dosage instructions. Finally, Renee reached the counter. The pharmacy assistant was young, maybe 22, with gelled hair and a name tag reading Brandon. She placed the prescription on the counter with shaking hands, damp from rain and sweat, despite the cold. "Hi, I need this filled, please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's urgent. My son has had a fever for 2 days." Brandon scanned the prescription, typed into the computer, disappeared into the back. Renee waited, counting her own heartbeats, feeling Noah's small body trembling with fever and exhaustion. Brandon returned with a small white bag, placed it on the counter. "That ends 47.90, he said, not looking at her directly. Renee pulled out her wallet, hands fumbling. She placed the ends 37.50 on the counter, bills and coins. Then she looked up at Brandon, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I have 37.50, she said quietly. "I'm $10 short. But this is urgent. My son needs to start the medication today. The pediatrician said it can't wait. I get paid on Friday. I can come back and pay the difference then. Or I can give you my phone number, my address, whatever you need. Please." Brandon's expression shifted into something cold. He crossed his arms. "Lady, this isn't a bank where we give out credit. If you don't have the money, come back when you do." His voice was loud enough that the people in line behind Renee could hear clearly. She felt heat rising to her face, not from fever, but from humiliation. "Brandon, please," she tried again, hearing her voice crack. "It's just $10. My baby is sick. Look at him." Brandon leaned back, his disdain visible now. "You're not the first desperate mother who's come in here with that story. We have rules. Either pay the full amount or move aside. There are other customers waiting." The words hit Renee like a physical blow. She stood frozen, Noah crying louder, the people behind her shifting uncomfortably. One woman looked sympathetic but said nothing. A man checked his watch impatiently. Renee felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt her throat closing. She was about to gather Noah, about to turn and walk out into the rain with nothing, about to fail at the one thing that mattered, when a voice cut through the horrible moment. Deep, firm, authoritative, but not unkind. "I'll pay the $10 she needs." Renee turned sharply. The man standing behind her in line was tall, probably early 40s, wearing an expensive-looking dark coat over a business shirt, salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled. His eyes were grey, direct, focused on Brandon with an expression that made the pharmacy assistant straighten involuntarily. The man stepped forward, pulled out a black leather wallet, extracted a $50 note, and placed it on the counter with deliberate calm. "Give her the medicine," he said, voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Keep the change, and write down your manager's name for me, because I'll be having a conversation about customer service." Brandon's face went pale. He fumbled with the register, bagged the medication, pushed it across the counter toward Renee. The man maintained eye contact with Brandon until the transaction was complete. Then he turned to Renee. His expression softened. "Are you all right?" Renee couldn't speak. She clutched the medication bag, tears spilling over now, nodding mutely. The man glanced at Noah, then at the rain visible through the glass doors. "Where are you going now?" Renee found her voice barely. "Bus stop. Home. Otahuhu." The man frowned slightly. "In this rain? With a sick baby? Let me drive you." Renee's automatic response was refusal. "No. Thank you, but no. You've already done too much." "I can't." The man's expression remained patient. "I know you can't. But your son needs to get home dry and warm to take that medicine. Please, let me help." Something in his tone, the lack of pity, the directness, the simple logical argument, broke through Renee's pride. She nodded, fresh tears coming. "Thank you," she whispered. The man gestured toward the doors. "My car is just outside." The car was a dark blue Mercedes, understated but unmistakably expensive. Leather seats, that particular silence of well-engineered German vehicles, the subtle scent of quality that Renee had only encountered in wealthy clients' homes during her occasional private cleaning jobs years ago. The man opened the rear passenger door, helped her settle Noah in carefully, then gestured to the front seat. "I'm Graham," he said simply as he started the engine. "Graham Bennett." Renee clicked her seatbelt with numb fingers. Renee Walker. The heater began warming the interior, and Renee felt the tension in her shoulders release fractionally as Noah's crying subsided to exhausted whimpers. Graham programmed the GPS for Otahuhu, merged into the evening traffic on Broadway. The windshield wipers moved rhythmically across the glass, smearing rain into patterns of light from street lamps and traffic signals. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Graham broke the silence. "How old is your son?" "9 months," Renee answered quietly, turning slightly to check on Noah in the back. "He's usually healthy. This fever just won't break." Graham nodded, keeping his eyes on the road as they navigated toward the motorway. "I remember those nights. When they're that small and sick, you'd give anything. My daughter Ruby, when she was about that age, had pneumonia. Worst week of my life." Renee glanced at him, surprised by the candor. "She's okay now." Graham's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's 16, physically healthy, otherwise complicated as teenagers are." He paused. "As fathers make them, more accurately." Renee didn't know what to say to that. They merged onto the southern motorway, red taillights stretching ahead through the rain, the city sprawling around them in the winter darkness. The silence shifted, became less uncomfortable. After several more minutes, Graham spoke again. "What do you do, Renee?" "Cleaning assistant at a veterinary clinic," she answered, feeling the familiar shame rise and forcing it down. 4 years. It's honest work." Graham glanced at her briefly. "I wasn't judging. I grew up in Mangere. My mother cleaned offices for 20 years. Honest work was all she knew, and she made sure I knew it too." The admission surprised Renee enough that she turned to look at him properly. "You grew up in Mangere?" Graham smiled slightly. A sad smile. "Hard to believe now, right? But yes, state housing, single mother, no father in the picture. I wore second-hand uniforms and worked at a fish and chip shop from age 14. Didn't have real money until I was 30, built a distribution company from nothing. Now I supply pharmaceuticals to 300 pharmacies across New Zealand, including the one we just left." Renee processed this information silently. "So you're successful," she said finally. Not quite a question. Graham's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm wealthy. Success is a different thing. I've been trying to figure out the difference for about 3 years now, since my marriage ended. Haven't succeeded yet." The honesty was disarming, vulnerable in a way Renee hadn't expected from a man in an expensive car offering rescue to strangers. "What happened?" Renee asked, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "Sorry, that's too personal." Graham shook his head. "It's fine. What happened is, I prioritized building an empire over building a relationship, worked 14-hour days, missed dance recitals and parent-teacher meetings and family dinners, told myself I was providing for them. Turns out my wife didn't want provision, she wanted presence. My daughter doesn't want money, she wants a father. By the time I understood that, it was too late. Fiona divorced me. Ruby barely speaks to me. I have a huge house in Remuera that I eat frozen meals in alone." The vulnerability in his voice was raw, real. Renee felt something shift in her perception of him, from wealthy stranger to lonely human being. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Graham shrugged. "I made my choices. Now I'm living with them, taking blood pressure medication at 42 because my body is collapsing from stress I created. Seeing a therapist who keeps asking what I'm running from, realizing I built a very expensive prison." They exited the motorway, navigated through the familiar streets of Otahuhu. Renee directed him through the residential area, past the small shops and takeaway restaurants, toward the housing complex where she lived. Graham parked in front of the 3-story building, plain concrete and weatherboard, functional and worn. Renee unbuckled her seatbelt, turned to retrieve Noah from the back seat. Graham got out simultaneously, came around to help. Together they climbed the 3 flights of external stairs, Renee carrying Noah, Graham carrying her bag and the pharmacy bag. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, end unit. Renee unlocked the door, feeling acutely self-conscious as Graham followed her inside. The entire apartment was smaller than his car probably cost. Kitchenette along one wall, futon that doubled as bed, small bathroom visible through a partially open door, Noah's crib in the corner. Clean but sparse, every item carefully chosen for necessity. Graham showed no judgment in his expression, only mild interest. Reminds me of my first flat in Otahuhu, actually, not far from here. 25 square meters, shared bathroom down the hall. I thought I'd made it because I had my own space finally. Renee managed a small smile as she laid Noah in his crib, began removing his damp clothes with gentle efficiency. Thank you, Graham, for everything. Seriously. I don't know how to repay you. Graham pulled a business card from his wallet, found a pen, wrote his mobile number on the back. You don't repay it, but if you need anything at all, call me. Renee took the card, looked at it without reading. I won't call, but thank you. Graham met her eyes steadily. I know you won't. Your pride won't let you. But I'm giving you the option anyway. He paused at the door. Take care of Noah. And yourself. Then he was gone, footsteps receding down the external stairs. Renee stood in the small apartment holding the business card, listening to the rain intensify against the window, feeling Noah's forehead already slightly cooler after the first dose of medicine. She placed Graham Bennett's card on the narrow counter, separating kitchenette from living space, certain she would never use it, trying to ignore the small voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, kindness from strangers didn't always have conditions attached. 5 days passed. Noah's fever broke within 48 hours. The antibiotics worked efficiently, and by Friday he was smiling again, babbling his nonsense syllables, reaching for Renee's face with small, sticky hands. Renee returned to her routine. Wake at 5:15, dress Noah, drop him at Mrs. Okoye's apartment downstairs, the elderly Nigerian woman who watched 3 neighborhood children for minimal cost, walk-run to the bus stop, 40-minute commute to Newmarket. 8 hours scrubbing and sanitizing and remaining invisible. Collect Noah. Walk to the small supermarket for whatever groceries $30 could buy. Cook simple meals. Bathe Noah. Read him the 3 board books she owned. Sleep fitfully. Repeat. She tried not to think about Graham Bennett, tried not to remember the gentleness in his voice, the lack of pity, the shared history he'd offered like a gift, tried not to wonder if he'd actually followed through on speaking to the pharmacy manager, or if that had just been theater for her benefit. Tried not to notice that she'd moved his business card from the counter to the small drawer, where she kept important documents, birth certificates and rental agreements and medical records. Friday evening, Renee was mopping the corridor outside the surgical suite when Janet appeared with unusual expression somewhere between annoyance and confusion. There's someone here to see you, she said, voice tight. Renee stopped mopping, heart suddenly racing. Is it about Noah? Is he okay? Mrs. Okoye would have called. Janet shook her head impatiently. It's not about your son, it's a man. Says his name is Graham Bennett. He's waiting in reception. Renee's stomach flipped. She placed the mop in the bucket, wiped her hands on her uniform, followed Janet to the small reception area at the clinic's entrance. Graham stood near the window, hands in the pockets of different expensive coat, charcoal grey this time. He turned when Renee entered, and his face relaxed into a genuine smile. Hi, he said simply. Hi, Renee managed, aware of Janet watching with undisguised curiosity from behind the reception desk. What are you doing here? Graham's smile became slightly sheepish. I wanted to check if you and Noah are okay. I know I could have called, but I was nearby, sort of. He was lying, Renee could tell. Newmarket wasn't on the way to anywhere from Remuera, not in evening traffic. He'd come specifically. The realization made her chest feel strange, tight and warm simultaneously. We're okay, Renee said quietly, glancing at Janet, who was pretending to organize papers but clearly listening. The medicine worked. His fever broke. Thank you again. Graham nodded slowly. Good, that's good. Then he hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his features. Can I buy you dinner? You and Noah, somewhere simple, wherever you choose, just to talk." Renee's immediate instinct was refusal. She didn't accept invitations from men she barely knew, especially men who drove Mercedes and had business cards with CEO printed on them. Especially men who looked at her like she was someone worth looking at, not invisible or pitiable. But there was something in Graham's eyes, a loneliness she recognized intimately because it mirrored her own. And before her rational mind could intervene, she heard herself say, "Okay." They arranged to meet Saturday evening at a small cafe restaurant in Otahuhu that Renee knew, a family-owned place called the Corner Kitchen, where meals were generous and inexpensive, and no one would look twice at a woman in op-shop clothes with a baby. Graham wrote down the address, promised to be there at 6 o'clock, left with another smile that did complicated things to Renee's carefully guarded emotional equilibrium. Saturday arrived with clear winter sky, rare sunshine, making everything seem slightly more possible. Renee dressed carefully, the nicest jeans she owned, a navy blue sweater her mother had given her last birthday, minimal makeup because she owned minimal makeup. She dressed Noah in the small striped onesie that made him look impossibly adorable, packed his diaper bag with practiced efficiency, told herself repeatedly this was just dinner, just conversation, just two lonely people sharing a meal, nothing more. Graham arrived exactly at 6, punctual as she'd suspected he would be. He'd dressed down, jeans and a simple grey Henley, but even casual clothes couldn't hide the quality, the fit, the subtle markers of wealth. But his smile when he saw Noah was utterly genuine, unguarded, and when Noah reached for Graham's face with curious fingers, Graham laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The corner kitchen was warm, windows fogged with steam from the kitchen, the scent of roasting meat and garlic and baking bread filling the small space. Mismatched chairs and tables with plastic covers, walls decorated with family photographs and handwritten specials on a chalkboard. The owner, Mrs. Battelle, greeted Renee with familiar affection, barely contained curiosity when she saw Graham, showed them to a corner table near the window. They ordered simple food, lamb curry for Graham, butter chicken for Renee, plain rice for Noah, who sat in a borrowed high chair, banging a spoon with concentrated joy. Graham played with Noah while they waited for food, making faces that sent the baby into giggles, peekaboo behind a napkin, silly voices. Renee watched, something in her chest expanding and aching simultaneously. Noah's father had disappeared the moment she told him about the pregnancy, had blocked her number, had never met his son. Noah had never had a man play with him like this, gentle and attentive and present. The food arrived steaming, fragrant. They ate slowly, conversation flowing more easily than Renee expected. Graham asked about her life, really asked, listened with full attention, as she explained about dropping out of university when her parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, about needing to support herself immediately, about the string of jobs that never quite paid enough, about getting pregnant with Noah and being abandoned, about deciding to keep him despite everyone saying she couldn't manage. "And you did manage," Graham said quietly. "You're managing. Against everything. That's not small." Renee shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I don't have a choice. He's my son." Graham shook his head. "There are always choices. You chose to fight. That matters." Renee turned the conversation, asked about his daughter Ruby, about the divorce, about how he'd built his company from nothing. Graham talked about those early years, working insane hours, taking risks, slowly building distribution contracts, opening warehouses, hiring staff. But the intoxication of success, the addiction to growth, the gradual realization that he'd sacrificed everything real for something hollow. About coming home to an empty house 3 years ago after Fiona left, standing in the enormous kitchen he'd renovated but never cooked in, understanding finally what he'd lost. "Do you see Ruby?" Renee asked gently. Graham's expression clouded. "Once a month if I'm lucky. She's angry with me. Rightfully. I missed years of her life. Can't get those back. Weekends, I didn't attend her netball games because I had meetings. School holidays, I sent her to camps because I couldn't take time off. She learned I was an ATM, not a father. Now she takes the money and avoids the calls. The pain in his voice was naked, real. Renee reached across the table instinctively, touched his hand briefly. You're trying now. That counts for something. Graham looked at her hand, then at her face. Does it? Or is it too late? Renee withdrew her hand, held his gaze. I don't think it's ever too late. Not if the trying is genuine. They stayed in the corner kitchen until Noah started fussing with tiredness, nearly 2 hours passing without either noticing. Graham insisted on paying despite Renee's protests. They walked slowly back to her apartment building, Noah drowsy against Renee's shoulder, the winter evening cold but clear, stars visible above the city lights. At the base of the external stairs, Graham stopped. Can I see you again? He asked, voice careful. Renee's heart hammered. Why? Graham smiled slightly. Because I haven't enjoyed an evening this much in years. Because you're interesting and real. Because your son is wonderful. Because I'd like to know you better. Honest enough? Too honest, Renee said, but she was smiling. Okay, yes. Graham's face lit with genuine pleasure, making him look younger, less burdened. Next Saturday? Renee nodded. Next Saturday. 6 weeks followed that felt simultaneously slow and impossibly fast. 6 Saturdays of dinners and walks and conversations. Graham integrated into Renee's small world with surprising ease. He came to Otahuhu, never suggesting they go to Remuera or anywhere that required Renee to feel out of place. They walked through Cornwall Park with Noah in his stroller, fed ducks at the pond, drank coffee from a thermos Renee brought because the cafe was too expensive. Graham accompanied her to the supermarket, pushed the trolley while she calculated prices and compared brands, never once suggesting he pay, respecting her independence even when she knew he noticed her putting items back because they pushed her budget over. He met her mother, who lived in Manukau, a tired woman who cleaned schools at night and watched Graham with suspicious eyes that gradually softened as he helped wash dishes and asked genuine questions about her life. They talked about everything. Childhoods marked by poverty and determination, dreams deferred and modified, the strange loneliness of their respective lives, his empty wealth, her struggling dignity. Graham confessed his anxiety, the panic attacks that had started after the divorce, the medication he took, the therapy sessions where he was slowly unpacking decades of emotional avoidance. Renee talked about the shame of poverty, of being invisible to people who had money, of fearing she was failing Noah by not providing more. You're giving him everything that matters, Graham insisted during one conversation as they sat in her small apartment after Noah had gone to sleep, speaking quietly in the near darkness. Love, stability, presence. That's what children need, not expensive toys or big houses. Renee wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that her love was enough, that her small apartment and second-hand baby clothes and discount brand formula were sufficient. On a Saturday afternoon in late July, after they'd spent the morning at the Auckland Domain watching Noah attempt his first unsteady steps on the grass, Graham kissed Renee for the first time. They were standing near his car, cold wind whipping across the park, Noah asleep in the stroller. Graham had been telling a story about his daughter, something funny, both of them laughing, and then the laughter faded and they were just looking at each other, and Graham leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her gently. It was careful, respectful, questioning. Renee kissed him back, her hand coming up to his chest, feeling his heart beating fast beneath her palm. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Graham rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling for you, he whispered. I need you to know that. I'm absolutely falling for you. Renee's eyes filled with tears she didn't fully understand. I know, she whispered back. Me too. The next Saturday, Graham invited Renee to dinner at his house in Remuera. He wanted her to meet Ruby, he said, wanted his daughter to understand there was someone in his life who mattered, who was making him happy in ways he hadn't been in years. Renee agreed, despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach, despite knowing that entering Graham's world was dangerous territory, despite suspecting that the fragile bubble they'd built was about to be tested. Graham's house in Remuera was exactly what Renee had imagined, and worse for being real. Modern architecture, all glass and clean lines, nestled on a quiet street where properties were measured not in square meters, but in millions of dollars. The interior was immaculate, professionally decorated in neutral tones, leather furniture and abstract art. A kitchen with marble countertops and appliances Renee had only seen in magazines. It was beautiful. It was sterile. It felt like a showroom, not a home. Ruby was waiting in the expansive living room, draped across a white leather sofa, scrolling her phone with studied disinterest. She was 16, slender and pretty in that effortless way wealthy teenagers manage, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Renee's monthly rent. She looked up when Graham entered with Renee and Noah, her expression shifting from boredom to something colder, more calculating. "Ruby," Graham said, voice carefully pleasant, "this is Renee Walker, and this is Noah. Renee, my daughter Ruby." Renee smiled, tried to project warmth despite the anxiety crawling up her spine. "Hi, Ruby." "It's nice to meet you." Ruby's eyes traveled slowly over Renee, assessing, cataloguing, finding her wanting. "So you're the cleaning lady my dad's been seeing," she said, voice sweet, but edged with something cruel. "How cute." The words landed like a slap. Graham's expression darkened immediately. "Ruby, that's completely inappropriate. Apologize." Ruby shrugged, returning to her phone. "Why? It's what she does, right? You said she works at a vet clinic cleaning. I'm just stating facts." Graham's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Renee spoke quietly. "I'm a cleaning assistant, yes. It's honest work. Nothing to be ashamed of." Ruby glanced up, smiled thinly. "Of course. I'm sure it's very fulfilling." She stood, stretched languidly. "I'm going to my room. I have plans later anyway." "Nice meeting you," she added, voice dripping with insincerity, then disappeared up the floating staircase to the second floor. Graham exhaled sharply, ran his hand through his hair. "Renee, I'm so sorry. She's been difficult lately, but that was unacceptable." Renee forced a smile that felt brittle. "It's fine. She's 16. Teenagers are complicated." But her hands were shaking slightly as she adjusted Noah in her arms, and Graham noticed, his expression pained with guilt. Dinner was strained despite Graham's attempts at normalcy. He'd cooked, surprisingly competently, a roast chicken with vegetables, set the large dining table carefully. Ruby didn't come down. They ate with Noah in a borrowed high chair, conversation halting, the house's silence oppressive. Afterward, Renee asked to leave earlier than planned, pleading Noah's bedtime routine. Graham drove her home through the darkening streets, his hand finding hers across the center console, squeezing apologetically. "I'll talk to her," he promised, as they sat outside Renee's apartment. "She'll come around." But Renee felt a heaviness settling in her chest, an understanding crystallizing that Graham's world and hers weren't just different. They were incompatible in ways that kindness and attraction couldn't bridge. Sunday afternoon, Graham's phone rang while he was reviewing distribution reports in his home office. Fiona, his ex-wife, rarely called unless necessary. He answered cautiously. "Fiona, what's wrong? Is Ruby okay?" Fiona's voice was sharp, controlled anger. "Ruby told me about your new girlfriend, the cleaning woman." Graham's grip on the phone tightened. "Her name is Renee, and she's not a cleaning woman. She's a person I care about deeply." Fiona laughed, a harsh sound. "Graham, have you lost your mind completely? You're dating someone who works as hired help? Do you understand how this looks? What this says about your judgment? More importantly, what message this sends to Ruby? I'm genuinely concerned about your mental state." Graham felt familiar anger rising, the same anger that had characterized their final year of marriage. "My mental state is fine. My judgment is fine. Renee is the first real thing in my life in years." "Real?" Fiona's voice rose. "Graham, she's poor. She has a baby. She probably sees you as a meal ticket. This is textbook gold digger behavior, and you're too lonely to recognize it." Graham stood abruptly, paced to the window overlooking his perfectly landscaped garden. "You don't know her. You don't know anything about this. Fiona's tone shifted, became colder, more calculated. I know that Ruby called me in tears last night. I know that you're exposing our daughter to inappropriate situations. And I know that if you continue this reckless behavior, I'll have grounds to revisit our custody arrangement. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Graham closed his eyes. Fiona, don't do this. You barely see Ruby as it is. I do, Fiona countered. And when I do, I want her in a stable environment, not watching her father play savior to some struggling single mother. Fix this, Graham, or I'll fix it legally. She ended the call. Monday brought worse news. Graham's mother called, her voice crisp with disapproval. Margaret Bennett was 72, formidable, retired from the pharmaceutical industry, but still holding 30% of Graham's company shares. Ruby told me about your new companion, she began without preamble. I'm deeply troubled, Graham. Graham braced himself. Mum, not you too, please. Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken. I built this company alongside you. I invested my retirement savings, and I will not watch you jeopardize our reputation and business relationships by involving yourself with someone completely unsuitable. She's not unsuitable, Graham said tiredly. She's wonderful. Kind and strong and real. Margaret's voice hardened. She's poor, Graham. She has no education, no prospects, a baby from God knows whom. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Think about the optics when clients find out. Think about Ruby. Think about what you're throwing away. Graham, if you persist in this foolishness, I'll sell my shares. I'll remove myself from the company entirely. You'll have to buy me out at market value. The number would be approximately $8 million. Graham's company was successful, profitable, but that kind of capital outlay would require significant restructuring, possibly taking on debt. His mother knew exactly what she was doing, applying pressure where it would hurt most. You wouldn't, Graham said quietly. Margaret's response was immediate. Try me. I raised you better than this. End it. End it now. Tuesday evening, Graham went to find Renee after her shift at the veterinary clinic. She was standing at the bus stop on Broadway, coat pulled tight against the winter wind, checking her phone. She looked up as his car approached, smiled when she recognized him, but the smile faded when she saw his expression. Graham parked, got out, approached her slowly. We need to talk, he said. Renee's expression shifted, guarded. Okay. Graham explained everything. Ruby's hostility, Fiona's threats about custody, his mother's ultimatum about the company shares. He laid it all out, watching Renee's face close progressively, walls going up that he'd spent weeks gently dismantling. When he finished, Renee was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite tears gathering in her eyes. You're losing your family and your business because of me. Graham reached for her hand, but she stepped back. That's not how I see it, he insisted. They're being unreasonable, prejudiced, cruel. Renee shook her head slowly. No, they're protecting you. From a mistake. You're not a mistake, Graham said desperately. Renee, you're the best thing that's happened to me in years. You made me remember what matters, what it feels like to be genuinely happy. Renee smiled sadly, tears spilling over. And you showed me what it's like to be seen, to matter to someone, to not be invisible. But Graham, I can't be the reason you lose your daughter, or destroy what you spent your whole life building. That's not love, that's destruction. Graham felt panic rising, cold and sharp. So what are you saying? Renee wiped her face with shaking hands. I'm saying you need to fix your relationship with Ruby first. With your family. You can't build something new when everything else is falling apart. Graham stepped closer. Come with me, we'll build it together, both things. I don't want to lose you. Renee's expression was breaking, pain evident in every line of her face. You need to figure out who you are without me first. You need to learn to be the father Ruby deserves, to make peace with your choices, to know that you can be happy in your own life before you try to merge it with mine. And I need to not be someone's rescue project or rebellion against family expectations. I need to be chosen for the right reasons, not the complicated ones. The bus arrived, hissing to a stop behind them, doors opening. Renee backed toward it. "I'll always be grateful, Graham, for the $10 in the pharmacy, for seeing me when no one else did, for making me believe I deserved better. But this needs to end here, before we both get hurt worse." Graham felt like the ground was dissolving beneath him. "Renee, please, don't do this." "I have to," Renee said softly and stepped onto the bus. Graham stood on the footpath, watching through the fogged windows as the bus pulled away, seeing her shape growing smaller, disappearing into the evening traffic. He stood there long after the bus was gone, cold wind cutting through his coat, understanding with terrible clarity that she was right, that he'd been asking her to carry weight that wasn't hers to bear, that love offered from a broken foundation wasn't love at all, it was burden. The weeks that followed were the hardest Graham had experienced since his divorce. He threw himself back into work with mechanical determination, 14-hour days that left him exhausted enough to sleep without dreaming. But the emptiness was worse now, sharpened by the memory of what 6 weeks with Renee had felt like. He'd tasted genuine connection, real presence, and returning to the hollow routine of his previous life felt like slow suffocation. His blood pressure spiked. The doctor increased his medication, warned about stress management, suggested he consider taking time off. Graham nodded absently, left the appointment, drove to another meeting. 3 weeks after Renee ended things, he had a panic attack in his office, chest tightening until he couldn't breathe, vision tunneling, convinced he was having a heart attack. His assistant called an ambulance. He spent 6 hours in Auckland City Hospital Emergency Department, hooked to monitors, doctors running tests, eventually diagnosing severe anxiety and releasing him with stern warnings about lifestyle changes. Ruby came to the hospital. Fiona had called her, and despite their fractured relationship, Ruby arrived pale and frightened, seeing her father diminished and vulnerable in a hospital gown. They sat in uncomfortable silence until the discharge papers were ready. Then Ruby spoke quietly. "Dad, are you okay? Really okay?" Graham looked at his daughter, this young woman he barely knew, who barely knew him. "No," he admitted. "I'm not." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "Is it because of her? The woman you were seeing?" Graham considered lying, decided against it. "Partly, but mostly because I've been living wrong for a very long time, and I finally saw it clearly, and now I don't know how to fix it." Ruby wiped her eyes roughly. "I was horrible to her. At the house. I was jealous and mean." Graham reached for her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. "You were protecting yourself. I haven't given you much reason to trust my judgment with relationships." Ruby's voice cracked. "Do you really like her that much?" Graham nodded slowly. "I love her, and her son. They made me feel like a real person again, not just a job title and a bank account." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Dad, when's the last time you were genuinely happy?" Graham thought carefully. "Before your mother left?" "Never, actually. I was successful but not happy. After, not until I met Renee. For 6 weeks I woke up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. I laughed, I played with a baby and felt joy instead of obligation. I had dinner conversations that weren't about business. I remembered what it felt like to matter to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with money." Ruby started crying properly then, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were going to forget about me completely if you had a new family. I thought I'd lose you." Graham pulled her into a hug, holding his daughter for the first time in months, maybe years. "Sweetheart, you can't lose something you never had. I wasn't present. I was physically there sometimes, but emotionally absent always. That's on me. But I want to change. I need to change." Ruby held on tightly. "Can you? People say that, but then nothing's different." Graham pulled back, looked at her seriously. "I can if I actually make different choices, not just say I will, but do it, which means restructuring my entire life. Less work, more presence, setting boundaries, letting go of things that don't matter to prioritize things that do. It means disappointing some people to stop disappointing the people who matter most." Ruby searched his face. "Do I matter most? "You're my daughter," Graham said quietly. "You've always mattered most. I just failed spectacularly at showing it." The conversation continued through the drive home, tentative at first, then more honest than any they'd had in years. Ruby talked about feeling abandoned when her parents divorced, about competing with Graham's phone and laptop for attention during their custody weekends, about taking money because it was the only thing he seemed willing to give freely. Graham listened without defending, acknowledging, apologizing, beginning the long work of rebuilding trust through presence, not promises. Over the following days, Graham made decisions, hard ones. He contacted his mother, arranged a meeting, informed her he was buying out her 30% stake in the company for $8 million. Margaret was stunned. "You'd go into debt for this woman." Graham shook his head. "For myself, for my daughter, for the life I should have been living all along. I'll finance it through the business. It'll take time to recover, but we'll manage. I need full control. I need to restructure so I'm working 6 hours daily, not 14. And I need you to understand that my personal life isn't subject to your approval anymore." Margaret argued, threatened, eventually accepted when she realized Graham was immovable. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Graham hired a CEO to manage daily operations, a capable woman from a competing firm who'd built her own work-life balance and understood Graham's new priorities. He restructured his role to strategic oversight, major decisions, 6 hours maximum daily. Mornings and evenings were now his, inviolable. He spent that time with Ruby. Actual time. Breakfast together before school. Dinners at home that he cooked. Simple meals they ate at the kitchen island, talking about her day, her friends, her worries, attending her netball games, every single one, learning the rules he'd never bothered to understand before. Being present, not perfectly but consistently. Ruby responded slowly, cautiously, like a plant given water after drought, beginning to trust that this version of her father might actually last. 2 months after the hospital on a Thursday evening, Ruby was helping Graham wash dishes after dinner when she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Have you talked to Renee?" Graham shook his head, hands stilling in the soapy water. "No. She was right to end things. I needed to fix myself first." Ruby dried a plate carefully. "But you have been fixing things. Shouldn't she know?" Graham managed a sad smile. "She told me to learn to be happy in my own life first, to be the father you deserve, to figure out who I am without her." Ruby considered this. "And have you?" Graham thought about the past 8 weeks, the therapy sessions where he'd finally started unpacking his workaholism, his emotional avoidance, his need for external validation. The mornings he woke without dread, the evenings with Ruby that felt real, substantive, the panic attacks that had stopped, the blood pressure that had normalized. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. "I'm different than I was. Not fixed, but changing genuinely." Ruby bumped his shoulder gently. "So maybe she should see that. Maybe she deserves to know that what she said mattered, that you actually did the work." Graham looked at his daughter, this wise young woman he'd almost lost through neglect. "You think I should tell her?" Ruby smiled. "I think you should show her." Friday evening at 6:30, Renee was leaving the veterinary clinic, exhausted from a long week, Noah heavy in the carrier against her chest. She emerged onto Broadway into the early winter darkness, pulling her coat tighter against the cold wind. And there was Graham, standing near the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. Renee stopped, heart lurching. "Graham," she said quietly, "what are you doing here?" Graham straightened slightly. "I wanted you to know what happened, not to pressure you, not to ask for anything, just to tell you that you were right, about everything." He explained, standing there on the footpath while evening commuters hurried past, about the panic attack in the hospital, about the real conversation with Ruby, about buying out his mother's shares, restructuring his company, hiring a CEO, redesigning his life, about 2 months of therapy and actual change, not promised but enacted, about learning to be present for his daughter, about rebuilding that relationship brick by careful brick. Renee listened, tears streaming silently down her face. Graham's voice was steady but vulnerable. You told me to figure out who I am, to learn to be happy in my own life, to be the father Ruby deserves. And I did. I am. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm genuinely different. I work 6 hours daily now, not 14. I have dinner with my daughter every night. I tend her games. I cook meals. I sleep better. I'm not running anymore. Why are you telling me this? Renee asked, voice barely above a whisper. Graham met her eyes directly. Because I want you to know that those 6 weeks with you changed my life fundamentally. You showed me what I was missing, what I deserved, what Noah and Ruby deserved. You gave me that gift even though it cost you. And whether or not you ever want to see me again, I needed you to know that you mattered, that you made a real difference. That $10 in a pharmacy led to a man completely reconstructing his existence. Renee was openly crying now, Noah stirring against her chest. Graham, I don't know what to say. Graham smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. He started to turn away, then paused. Actually, there is one thing. Ruby wants to apologize to you. Properly. In person. If you'd be willing. No pressure. But she asked me specifically to ask you. Renee processed this, the magnitude of what it meant. Your daughter wants to apologize. Graham nodded. She's been learning about taking responsibility, about how her words impact people, about trying to be better than her worst moments. Sounds like she's learning from you, Renee said softly. Graham's expression was pained and proud simultaneously. I hope so. She deserves better examples than I've provided historically. Renee made a decision, heart pounding. Okay, yes, I'll meet with her and with you. Graham's face transformed with cautious hope. Really? Renee nodded. Saturday. The corner kitchen at 6. Bring Ruby. We'll talk. All of us. Graham looked like he wanted to hug her, but held himself carefully still. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Saturday evening arrived cold and clear. Renee dressed carefully, nervous in ways she couldn't quite name. She arrived at the corner kitchen 5 minutes early, secured their usual corner table, ordered chai tea to steady her hands. Graham and Ruby arrived exactly at 6, Ruby looking significantly less hostile than the first time Renee had seen her, actually looking quite nervous herself. They sat awkwardly. Then Ruby spoke, the words clearly rehearsed but sincerely delivered. Renee, I'm really sorry for how I treated you at our house. What I said was cruel and classist and wrong. You didn't deserve that. I was jealous and scared, and I took it out on you in a really horrible way. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I wanted you to know I'm genuinely sorry. Renee looked at this 16-year-old trying hard to do better, saw the sincerity, remembered being young and scared and protective. I forgive you, Ruby. Thank you for apologizing. Ruby's relief was visible, tangible. Then Noah, who Renee had been holding, reached toward Ruby with a bright smile, clearly wanting to be held. Ruby looked uncertain. Can I? Renee handed Noah over carefully. Ruby held him gently and Noah immediately grabbed her hair, laughing delightedly. Ruby started laughing too, genuine and young. They ordered food, talked carefully at first, then more easily. Ruby asked about Noah, about Renee's work, actual interested questions. Renee asked about school, netball, Ruby's plans after graduation. Graham watched both of them, something in his expression open and grateful. After dinner, they walked slowly to Cornwall Park despite the cold, Ruby pushing Noah's stroller, chatting easily with Renee about nothing important and everything significant. At the end of the evening, back at Renee's apartment building, Ruby hugged Renee briefly. Can we do this again? Renee smiled. I'd like that. Ruby headed to Graham's car to give them privacy. Graham and Renee stood in the familiar spot at the base of the external stairs, the city quiet around them. I meant what I said, Graham told her quietly. I'm different. I'm trying every day. I want to keep trying. With Ruby, with myself, and if you're willing, with you and Noah. Not rushing, not pressing, just seeing if what we had before can exist in this new version of my life. Renee felt the walls she'd carefully rebuilt wavering, threatening to collapse entirely. "I'm scared," she admitted, "that this is temporary, that you'll go back to how you were, that I'm setting myself up to get hurt." Graham nodded slowly. "That's fair. I can't promise perfection. I can promise consistency, presence, real effort, and time. As much time as you need to see that this is genuine." Renee looked up at him, this man who'd paid $10 in a pharmacy and accidentally changed both their lives completely. "Okay," she said quietly. "Slow, careful, but okay." Graham's smile was like sunrise, transformative and warm. "Okay," he echoed. 8 months later, Renee had completed her high school equivalency certificate, funded by a scholarship Graham's company had established specifically for single parents in financial hardship. She'd enrolled in a healthcare certificate program, studying part-time while still working at the clinic, working toward becoming a healthcare assistant. Graham had hired her into the company's HR department at ends $3,800 monthly, working reduced hours that accommodated her study schedule and Noah's needs. Noah, now 17 months old, called Graham Gray, and Ruby Rube, adored them both with the uncomplicated devotion of toddlers. Ruby babysat twice weekly, developing a genuine bond with Noah, learning responsibility and patience and love that wasn't transactional. Graham and Renee had dinner together 4 nights weekly, sometimes at his house in Remuera, which now had toys scattered around and actual laughter echoing through rooms, sometimes at her apartment which he'd quietly helped renovate, new appliances and paint and furniture she'd chosen herself, accepting help with grace she'd learned slowly. On Noah's 2nd birthday, they celebrated at the corner kitchen with both families present, Renee's mother and Ruby and Mrs. Okoye and Mrs. Patel, who'd watched their relationship grow through countless dinners. Noah smeared chocolate cake across his face while everyone laughed, and Graham caught Renee's eye across the table, smiled that particular smile reserved only for her. Later that evening, after everyone left, after Noah was asleep in his crib, Renee and Graham walked to the small neighborhood park 3 blocks from her apartment. They sat on a bench under street lamps, cold winter air carrying the scent of rain approaching, the city humming around them with familiar comfort. Graham held her hand, not saying anything profound, just being present. And there, in that ordinary park in Otahuhu, watching children's playground equipment empty in the darkness, Renee understood that this was wealth. Not the kind measured in bank accounts or property values or business equity, but the kind built slowly through presence and consistency, through showing up and staying, through choosing each other daily despite easier options existing, through $10 offered without expectation becoming foundation for something real and lasting. It wasn't perfect love from fairy tales. It was better. It was human and flawed and persistent. It was connection that transcended the arbitrary barriers of class and circumstance. It was about being seen, truly seen, and choosing to see in return. And sometimes rescue isn't about money at all. Sometimes it's just about paying attention when someone needs it most, and having the courage to accept that attention when it's offered with genuine respect. Yeah,